Hi, my name is Pawan.
And I'm Ananda Krishnan, also called Jake, not Ananda. And we work at Ravenhat Technologies.
This is probably the only talk where there are two speakers. And we haven't rehearsed who says what, so we'll be stepping on each other's toes. So bear with us. Okay, quick disclaimer. Most of what we are going to talk about is actually platform and language independent, or at least the lessons learned. But the reason we are talking here in a RubyConf is because of the Ruby community. We really think that a lot of things that we are going to talk about resonates really well with the community, and we are hoping to drive a good discussion, conversation, whatever it is, from this audience. So that's really why we are talking here on this topic.
And a lot of the points that we're going to talk about kind of naturally apply to Rails and Ruby. And most of these we learned and we sort of experienced in our projects, which were mostly in Ruby and Rails.
So let's start with confession. We have screwed up a lot in our careers, right? Between me and Jake, we have no idea how many mistakes we have made. And on those rare occasions, we have actually learned from it. Or at least we would like to think so. This talk is about one such mistake from which we learned. And
I think most of it we just put it up from just based on projects and as we were talking about what happened with each of us and things like that. So just trying to make it presentable and that's the bit we want.
Though we screwed up, we would like to believe that no employers or paranoid androids were hurt in the process of our mistakes. So about 3 months back. So why pharmacists and doctors, right? So about 3 months back, I was in this pharmacy buying diapers for my daughter, and in walks this guy. He just goes straight to the pharmacist and he's like, "Hey, can you give me something for a toothache?" There was something very interesting and weird about this, and Jake and I, we carpool. So next morning I was just telling Jake, and between the two of us, we realized that we have seen people ask for all sorts of medicines in a pharmacy, right? Headaches, fever. A true story, I even saw this guy with a lot of cuts on his face from a knife, and insane, right? And when we were talking about this, we thought there was something fundamentally wrong with this. Is there anyone here who thinks that it's totally okay for you to just walk up to a pharmacist and ask for a medicine? Oh yeah, okay, cool, yeah, so, nice. Okay, hold that thought. What we think is, yes, of course, the pharmacy potentially has a cure for pretty much most ailments that you could think of. And but the important thing is, though, that you need to know what ailment you have, right? There's that small implementation detail, right? And if it were that easy for you to just go to the right medicine and get it, this world would be filled with only pharmacists and not doctors, right? So that's where the whole analogy starts, and then we'll get to how we connect to what we are going to talk about.
And that's where we sort of thought that we'll use this metaphor to drive out that point. Of course, a lot of you might have your opinions about self-medication and the whole thing. So we'll stop it at this, and we will give us our definition of what we think about these two sort of mindsets actually are, and So starting off with like doctors, right? They don't treat, right? Really, they don't try to treat the symptoms. It's about how you deal with them. So they go about just figuring out what the problem could be, and then probably a lot of tests, make you run through a few tests, or try and figure out what if indeed it is the problem, and then try and based on that prescribe a treatment, and of course make sure that you're okay at the end of it, right? The symptoms are gone, right?
Yeah, and we didn't take it from a medical textbook, so we don't know if this is right. We're assuming this is what worked for us. So,
and again, in contrast, a pharmacist's job we think very different. Should be more about understanding the medicines, the medicines themselves. Probably even figure out what the disease is based on the medicine, right? But definitely, they don't really think about what was the problem originally, or what are we prescribing this treatment for? And they usually don't do it. Hopefully they don't do it.
Okay, so now with this context of what we mean by a doctor and a pharmacist and medicines and self-medication, let's get back to our mistake, which we want to talk about, right? So our mistake that today we want to talk about is the way we have dealt with, or rather we used to deal with, bad symptoms on our code bases and on our projects, right? So a lot of times you see these in your code bases. There is a symptom, or there are some issues, right? So we obviously had a lot of those in every single project we have worked on, and this is about how we dealt with that, right?
Let's start off with one very simple one, or at least the one which was the most easily expressible.
As in Tejas Dinkar, who has already been mentioned 7 times so far in different talks. He threatened us to throw off the stage if we took anything more than 29 minutes, 59 seconds. So we had to really dumbify our anecdotes. But in the end, we have a quick mention of different things which we would love to talk about offline. But yeah, so thanks, Tejas.
So we'll get started with the first one. So this was in a project where we had the familiar problem of regression bugs. We added new features, and that kept breaking things. So this is what we decided. I mean, we want this down. We want the number of bugs down from 10 to 5. At that time it was like, let's set up this goal. Let's try and achieve this. What did we do? Oh, before that, some facts about the project, right? This was not a project we started on from scratch. So it was a lot of legacy code, a lot of code that we did not understand, and probably that's why I thought it was bad. And the test coverage was...
How many of you have taken over a code base from another team and thought the code base was awesome? Very small sample set, though, so we'll assume everybody thought it was bad. Okay.
Yeah. Sure. So test coverage was low, which was probably one of the reasons why people complained about the code base, of course. So... What's your guess? I'll just go back again.
The problem we had was every time we checked in something, built a new feature, touched any part of the code base, we ended up breaking a whole bunch of other things. And we would not even know it right away, we would know it over a period of time. Right? So this was a regression problem. And given the facts, what would you probably have done?
I'll try and just go back again, and not hopefully forward or down.
Yeah, these were some facts.
Sure. So the low coverage was definitely a problem. We thought, everybody agreed that we need to start working on that and, fix the coverage. So we went in there, put the coverage tool in place, and then we decided we will write tests for every bug we caught. We got the coverage up, not very surprising. I mean, we did manage to, start improving the coverage over a period of time.
Okay, so so this was a problem, right? Like when you look at when we try to abstract into what our thought process was, it was something like this, right? Jake.
Sorry. You want to keep this?
Yeah. So we had a symptom. In this case, it was low test coverage, and Jake. We decided on what metric and tool to use. In our case, it was very simple, line coverage, right, and ORCOW. This was back in the days. And then started solving that problem that we had. And then, hopefully, for example, we were TDDing most of the new code that we wrote, so coverage was good on that. Then start writing tests for things which were any part of the code base which we touched where there were no tests, we started adding tests there. A bunch of different things. So basically, idea was to improve the coverage and keep iterating, right? So cool. So and what was the result? We ended up with, of course, drastically improving our test coverage. So we were in the late 90s for most of part of the code base, which was awesome.
100, man, 100.
100, yeah. Sure. Very good coverage, but things got only marginally better. At this point, this was when we realized that in spite of putting so much effort into actually improving our test coverage, our actual goal was to actually reduce the number of regression bugs, right? So we were still no better than what we started off about 2 months back. The devs were generally very happy. Now they were doing a lot more TDD. They were they had successfully convinced the project manager and the stakeholders to spend more time on tech debt and things like that. So the devs were happy, but the project manager was extremely frustrated because in spite of spending so much effort, there was no real benefit from any of it, right? So it's like one of those very classic moments right out of Dilbert where in Dilbert developers are never happy, but at least here we were happy and the project manager was sad. Right?
And we weren't happy with the project manager, of course.
Yeah, and eventually even we felt there was something wrong, right? I mean, it's not like we take pleasure out of it. So we think this is a very big mistake where we spent almost 2 months of time without really realizing where we were going wrong, right? So this mistake and several mistakes across different projects which they just wouldn't let us go into ended up making us realize something very basic, right? And this is basically this is what we were going to say. If we had like a lightning talk, this is probably the only thing we would have put up and left, right? So never improve a metric. Solving a problem should automatically improve the metric that you are measuring, right? So the focus is never on making your metric better. It's always about solving a problem. And the
this
metric,
is like one of those things that are that's very easily said and very hard to do. At least for us, we have always fell in that trap of.
Yeah, like it almost sounds like do the right thing, but yeah, like it's very it appeals to common sense very well. But then when you're caught up with the daily nitty-gritties of what you do in a project, it becomes very easy for you to miss the point here. So yeah, like this is really what is the essence of what we are trying to say, right?
So what really happened here? Let's go a little bit more into what we were trying earlier and what we think we should have probably done. Instead of something like this, which actually ended up attacking the symptom or targeting the symptom, we wanted to do something like this. There is a symptom, so just like
this is where the whole the pharmacist and the doctor approach. Yeah, it's a very long shot metaphor. We agree, but
this is the doctor thinking, which we hopefully want to do. Is first just try and take a guess at least at the problem, at least in our context, maybe not the doctors, but in our context, take a guess at the problem, right? Think what it might be. Then that hopefully will tell you what you could do to probably solve the problem. That could be the solution, which will hopefully fix the problem, right? So this kind of very similar. We are iterating over this and then hopefully improving on what we thought was a problem. How do you know then that we are in fact improving on the problem? How do we know that?
How do you define done, right? So
and that's where we think
define done?
That's where we think the metrics come in. Again, not metric, hopefully metrics, because that lets us measure the problem, tells us at every point that you're doing better, it's improving, and hopefully also when it gets done, right? So yeah. So this is probably the approach that we would like to try from now on, and right there, the problem may not be the original one which we started out to fix, like probably in our previous case, you should always be open to the idea that the problem, what you thought was a problem, was never the case, and it was not showing up. I mean, you were trying to, you were seeing the metrics improve, but then the symptom never went away, right? So be open to the notion that the problem could be different, in which case the important thing is the solution is different and the metrics are different, right? So yeah.
Any guesses on what could have been the problem on that project where the regression bugs were very high? It was duplication, as in there was rampant duplication all over the place, and we would change something but forget to change the same thing in some other place. And because we didn't know about the code base, we were just blindly adding tests, and we were incrementally going through different places. Each place where we found that there were no tests, we added a test there, right? But that didn't really help us with actually solving the problem of duplication. Right. Yeah. So
the coverage number is something which easily drives you to just keep adding the specs, and we will talk a bit more about that soon.
Yeah, so if you really think about it, basically what, at least we would love to believe that we have stopped doing this, right? Yogi mentioned this in the panel discussion yesterday, blog post driven decisions, right? So that was really what we were doing essentially. Like we were a bunch of kids on this project who would see a problem at the first, trigger, we would just start crawling the web, start crawling blog posts, see different GitHub projects, find a gem, install it, start like monitoring it, measuring it, try to improve it, without really spending too much time into figuring out what was really the problem, right? Especially so in, where does, especially so in Rails projects where, or Ruby projects where we believe that the number of gems which actually bundle best practices is actually very high, right? Here it's very easy for us to fall into the trap of, okay, just choose a gem, start using it, and then 2 months or 3 months down the line, you have no idea why you used it in the first place, but it's just there in your process, right? Like at least we used to find ourselves in that trap all the time. So yeah, this is basically what we stopped doing. Okay, at this, so this dude is basically Hari. He's sitting way over there. Yesterday we were doing a dry run, and he was like, dude, you're up to this point it's fine, but it's getting monotonous. It's very black and white, and you need more images. And Jake and I would, we really
that's
think
our
that
image, Hari. Done.
we really think that we don't know how to add images to a presentation, and we were like, okay, fine, Hari, we'll just add your picture. And yeah, so thanks for the and. As you notice, we are very receptive of feedback. So
He hasn't spoken yet, but his is full of interesting ones.
Like it would have been funnier because his was the presentation before it got rescheduled. But yeah, anyway, he'll be talking next. So yeah, when you look at test coverage, right? How many of you think you understand test coverage very well? Well enough. Okay. I mean, sure.
This was one thing which at least struck us as a very obvious metrics thing which we always get into. And
when we were young and stupid as against now old and stupid, right? We used to think, oh, test coverage, what's there? It's just, it's so easy, right? But then we realized even something so seemingly obvious had like so many different shades of details, right? And once you start understanding it and putting it in context is when you really understand the complexity of that. That thing that you're measuring, right? Now think of all the things that people at Flipkart measure. I don't even know if they have a rationale behind every one of it. I'm hoping they do. But, it becomes very, okay, we just need to monitor these 10 things. Why? Why are you doing it, right? So it should not be like a checklist at every project on start. You just start using it. So yeah, test coverage is definitely one thing that we found where on start of every project, you just set up a coverage tool. We just wanted to talk about some details on what we learned when doing that. So yeah.
So first one, we'll start off the obvious one, the measuring. So controller specs versus model specs coverage. I'm guessing does it ring any bells? Think of it this way. Like here's a question for you, yeah. Right? You have let's take a simple case. There is a single controller. You have a spec around it. There's a corresponding model. You have a spec around it, right? And then you have with these two tests, you have run your coverage, right? I'm
and
guessing
you get
it's going to be 100%.
Do you see a problem with this? Could there be a problem with this?
What if you just remove the model spec?
What will the coverage for model be? Is there a chance that model's coverage is not 0?
Your controller spec is still going to be loading the model. So your coverage
depends
will
on
still show
the
as 100%.
answer is it depends, right? Like it really depends on how you're testing your controller. But most of the times what we have seen is not every model is mocked out in the controller. Well, it's a totally different debate whether should you mock your models or not. But if you are not mocking, right, your models are being loaded in your controller. So the controller spec, when it is tested for, like when the coverage is reported, your models are being reported as well.
Yeah. While the point we are trying to make here is not about whether you should how you should test your model specs and controller specs. What we do implore you to do is make sure that when you're looking at your coverage, you do have in mind your testing strategy, which is, am I actually mocking the model out, Or is it also getting loaded as a part of my controller spec? Is my controller spec also hitting the models, right? Think about these things when you're looking at these numbers, right? Something that worked for us, which we tried to do, was we started monitoring the model specs coverage independently, and then started looking at the controller specs in light of the model spec coverage. We wanted the model spec coverage to be high, because at least we wanted hopefully all our business logic was in the model specs, and that's what we were keen on. Yes. Yeah, and then the next one, the line coverage itself. I think most commonly when we talk about coverage, we just talk about line coverage, but then there is a bunch of other things as well, branch coverage, and then unique path coverage.
How many of you pay attention to branch coverages?
Or even monitor it?
Even monitor.
Cool.
How many of you don't think it's important? How many of you have no opinions? Cool. Yeah, I mean, sure. We have been on projects where it's been important, it's not been important, it's fine, but it's just that you just need to know that it exists and you need it when you need it, right? So.
Yeah. Just it hopefully should not be about the single metric. Something usually seems wrong if it is just going to be about that one metric. Next one. So reporting. This one is a bit tricky. What I usually don't like about coverage tools and these tools in general is they sometimes miss out this aspect of it, and they, in an attempt to try and be nice to you and give a very simple answer, they just try and give out a number which inherently makes it good or bad. There's nothing in between, and then the focus is lost. Like you either start liking it or you don't like it. You don't really think about what is there in between, right? So the focus on some of the aspects of where is the coverage low, what does it mean, right? One thing that worked for us was Code Climate in the region projects. We really like it because they've put a lot of focus into the presentation aspect of it, not just the collection aspect of it. It really takes you down to the code which is missing the specs. Of course, they do also other metrics like code quality, which I really like, by the way. They have some notification things like that, like Pawan likes this a lot. Whenever his commit goes in, poof, the coverage goes down or something like that. It doesn't break the bill. The important part is it doesn't break the bill, but it lets you know, and then you can deal with it if you think it is important to deal with.
Okay, speaking of breaking build, how many of you know the term ratcheting in builds? Okay, so idea of ratcheting is basically you will never leave your code base worse than what it already was, right? So every commit basically make sure, even if it doesn't do any good, it doesn't do any bad to your code base. So for example, if your current code coverage is at 70%, and if this check-in makes it 69%, it will break the build. Even though there's nothing functionally wrong with it, it's bad, right? We really think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, this is one of those things which is, in theory, sounds very, very good and correct. But in practice, what it typically ends up doing is people end up fretting the actual metric and never about what the problem is, right? Because this exactly does what we said in the previous slide, which is coverage is never red or green, right? Sometimes you are okay with taking this hit because you want to do something. I mean, there are so many reasons why, which in reality, you may have to do some bad things and eventually have to pay for it, but it's okay. It's a conscious decision, right? But ratcheting invariably stops that. It makes it very, black and white, right?
Difficult for you to proceed at that very moment.
Yeah, and like it has a more behavioral impact on the team, which is your team members start hating either the ratcheting or they start hating the metric. Or, we had this one person who did not commit for 4 days because they thought they did not have enough test coverage. And like when we preached the whole frequent check-in, small check-in, and this person was actually scared because they would break the build, is actually a very, very bad signal. Bad sign from your team, right? Now you can always argue, okay, this person totally missed the point. We can say a bunch of things, right? But this is the reality. So we think that it's a good idea, so that you might want to do it at certain points in time. But yeah, be very, very careful about the freakonomic implication that it has on your team, right? Always keep that in mind.
Yep. And then the very other popular thing, which is you just write that test to bump up the coverage a few notches.
Yeah, so there's this one more philosophy of overall coverage, which is saying, okay, you just checked in code, but you don't have a test for this, but that's okay. There's this other class which does not have a test for it, which is easy, so I'll just add a test there and keep my coverage maintained, right? There are so many weird things people end up doing just because they are now worried about coverage and not really worried about what it means to lower, what it means with what they are doing, right? So
when you first set it up, it's done with the best of intentions, but then you get really, really bad results.
So, okay, how did we go? I mean, how do we now improve? So we still take over a lot of projects, customer. We are mainly now in consulting, so we do end up taking over code bases, right? So what do we do to improve coverage if we have a bad one? One thing we realized is adding unit tests to classes, existing classes, could be a very dangerous thing, right? What that essentially means is you're cementing the current design. Now, I won't say, prejudicially, it might be bad design or good design, right? But you are cementing it, right? If at all you want to cement something, cement features, cement functionality, right? Which means you might want to write like a much higher level test and ensure that the functionality is same so that you can go ahead and refactor later. On this one project which Yogi, me, and Jake worked together on in ThoughtWorks, it worked beautifully for us, where we were strangling IBATIS and moving over to Hibernate, which meant that all our entire unit tests and database level tests were completely invalidated. They were useless, right? Because we wanted to turn on L2 caches, transactions changed. Like that meant the whole app was rendered useless from a testing point of view, right? From a safety net point of view. But what came to our help was controller and beyond level tests. So we had such good coverage there that we went in and we just modified a whole bunch of things and we started deleting tests. You get a lot more flexibility and freedom inside your code base when you know that you're not breaking any functionality. So yeah, it's a really, really good thing. So definitely think about it when you're inheriting a legacy code base.
Unit tests are great, but do keep in mind that they might also come in the way of refactoring and changes.
Yeah.
Big.
So, okay, the whole measurement, reporting, ratcheting, improvement, all of this is basically saying always keep the problem you're solving in mind, right? Ratchet, don't ratchet. How do you decide? Well, is it helping you to achieve your goal or the problem you have at hand? Sure, so do it. Otherwise, don't do it, right? It's, yeah.
Yep, I think.
So, the second anecdote, I'll just quickly talk
only
about.
Have 5 minutes, so.
Yeah, the second anecdote was basically. Okay, we had this server which was under a very heavy load, and thousands of requests a minute, and only about 5% of those requests in very seemingly arbitrary periods of times and arbitrary controllers and actions would pause, and it would take a very long time, right? So this problem was way more technical. It had got nothing to do with the behavior or practices part of side of things. It was like a pure technical problem, and the goal was for us to find the root cause of this unpredictable behavior and fix it, right? We can definitely talk about how we went into a lot of solving a lot of different symptoms. At one point, even suspecting JRuby. It's very it becomes very hard for you to figure out, okay, what is the problem, what is the symptom, and go very methodical about it, right? So that's what this this problem was going to be about. But let's take this offline. At this point,
before that, let's get on to the questions.
Yeah, we'll take some questions if you have any.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.